For more original stories, subscribe to Audio Tales. Now, let's begin this one. The sharp, insistent rapping on the front door shattered the Saturday morning peace. Sarah Miller, mid-flip on a pancake, spatula in hand, exchanged a puzzled glance with her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, who was meticulously arranging blueberries on her own stack. 6-year-old Tom, engrossed in a cartoon on his tablet at the kitchen table, didn't even look up. "Who could that be?" Sarah murmured, wiping her hands on her apron. They weren't expecting anyone. A knot of unease began to tighten in her stomach. An unexpected knock always felt ominous these days, a lingering symptom of her acrimonious split from Mark. She peered through the peephole, and her blood ran cold. 2 police officers stood on her porch, their expressions stern, their stances official. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This couldn't be good. "Mommy, who is it?" Lily asked, her voice small, sensing the sudden shift in her mother's demeanor. "Just a moment, sweetie," Sarah said, forcing a calmness she didn't feel into her voice. She opened the door a crack, her body instinctively shielding her children from view. "Officers? Is there a problem?" The taller officer, Miller, as his name tag read, a cruel irony sharing her surname, spoke. "Are you Sarah Miller?" His voice was devoid of warmth. "Yes, that's me. What's this about?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Ms. Miller, we have a warrant for your arrest," Officer Davies, the shorter of the two, stated, holding up a folded document. "Arrest?" Sarah echoed, her mind reeling. "For what? This has to be a mistake. I haven't done anything." Lily, drawn by the word arrest, crept closer, her eyes wide with fear. Tom, finally distracted from his cartoon, looked over, his lower lip beginning to tremble. "The warrant is for grand larceny and violation of a restraining order, ma'am," Officer Miller said. "We need you to come with us." "Grand larceny? Restraining order? That's insane!" Sarah cried, her voice rising in panic. "Mark! This is Mark, isn't it? He's making this up." Mark Thorne, her ex-husband, the man who had turned their once loving home into a battleground of emotional warfare. He had a restraining order against her? It was laughable, if it weren't so terrifyingly real. He was the one who had stalked her, harassed her, made her life a living hell since she'd finally gathered the courage to leave. "We just execute the warrant, ma'am," Officer Davies said, his hand moving towards his handcuffs. "Please, let's do this quietly. For the children." The mention of her children, standing there white-faced and terrified, was like a physical blow. Quietly. How could any of this be quiet? "But my kids, I can't just leave them," she pleaded, her eyes darting between the officers and her frightened children. Lily started to cry, fat tears rolling down her cheeks. Tom let out a whimpering sob and ran to cling to Sarah's leg. "You'll need to arrange for someone to look after them," Officer Miller said, his expression unmoved. "Do you have family nearby?" Family. Her parents lived 3 states away. Her sister was overseas. Marcus, parents? Absolutely not. "My neighbor, Carol. But this is happening too fast." She felt the world tilting, the smell of pancakes now acrid and sickening. "We need to go, Ms. Miller," Officer Davies insisted, stepping forward. He gently pried Tom from her leg. The boy wailed, a heartbreaking sound that tore through Sarah. Lily was openly sobbing now. "Mommy, no! Don't let them take you!" "It's okay, babies, it's okay," Sarah choked out, though it was anything but. "Mommy just needs to sort out a misunderstanding. I'll be back soon." She looked at Officer Miller. "Please, can I just call my neighbor? They can't stay here alone." He hesitated, then nodded. Quickly, her hands shook so violently she could barely dial Carol's number. Carol, bless her heart, answered on the second ring and, though audibly shocked, promised to be right over. The wait for Carol felt like an eternity, filled with the agonizing sounds of her children's distress and her own frantic attempts to reassure them while her world crumbled. When Carol arrived, her kind face etched with concern, Sarah could only offer a weak, grateful smile before Officer Davies took her arm. "You need to turn around, ma'am." The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, a sound that would echo in her nightmares for years to come. She was being arrested, in front of her children. Lily screamed, a raw, terrified sound. Tom just stared, his small face a mask of utter desolation and confusion. "Mommy loves you. Be good for Carol," Sarah called out, her voice thick with unshed tears, as they led her out the door, past the blueberry pancakes growing cold on the table, past the life she had so painstakingly tried to rebuild. The shame was a burning cloak around her as she was guided into the police car, the curious eyes of other neighbors peeking from behind curtains. The doors slammed shut, and with it, a chapter of her life ended, replaced by a terrifying, unknown void. Her last glimpse was of Lily and Tom, faces pressed against the window, their small hands waving, their tears like daggers in her heart. This was Mark's doing. He had finally found a way to break her completely. Or so he thought. The ride to the station was a blur of self-recrimination and fear. How had she let it get to this point? Why hadn't she seen Mark for what he truly was sooner? The early days of their relationship had been a whirlwind romance. Mark was charming, attentive, successful. He'd swept her off her feet. They married, had Lily, then Tom. Life seemed idyllic. But slowly, insidiously, his charm had curdled into control. It started with small criticisms, her cooking, her friends, her clothes. Then came the isolation. He'd subtly drive wedges between her and her support system. He took control of their finances, giving her an allowance as if she were a child, despite her working part-time as a freelance graphic designer. Her income went straight into his account. He'd check her phone, her emails, questioning every interaction. The emotional abuse was relentless, chipping away at her self-esteem until she felt like a hollow shell. The breaking point had come 6 months ago. He'd been in a rage over something trivial, a bill she'd forgotten to query. And he'd raised his hand to her for the first time. He didn't strike her, but the threat hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. In his eyes, she saw a stranger, a cruel, volatile man she no longer recognized. That night, after he'd stormed out, she packed a few bags for herself and the children, and fled to a women's shelter. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Mark fought her on everything, especially custody. He painted her as unstable, an unfit mother. Now this, grand larceny and violating a restraining order she didn't even know existed. What had he accused her of stealing? His precious collection of antique maps? Money he claimed she'd siphoned from their joint account before she left? An account he'd systematically emptied himself? At the station, the process was dehumanizing. Fingerprints, mugshots, the cold indifference of the officers. She was allowed one phone call. Not to her children. Carol would be handling that. She called the only lawyer whose number she'd memorized from a legal aid pamphlet. Eleanor Vance. Ms. Vance listened patiently, her voice a calm reassurance in the swirling chaos of Sarah's mind. She promised to meet her at the courthouse for the arraignment. Hours later, changed into a drab, ill-fitting jumpsuit, Sarah was led into a sterile, imposing courtroom. Her heart pounded. She scanned the faces, and there he was, Mark, sitting in the public gallery, looking smug, a parody of concern etched on his face, no doubt for the benefit of anyone watching. Beside him sat his expensive, shark-like lawyer, Mr. Peterson. Sarah felt a surge of renewed anger, then a wave of despair. How could she fight this? He had all the money, all the power. Ms. Vance, her public defender, was a woman in her late 40s, with tired eyes but a determined set to her jaw. She squeezed Sarah's arm reassuringly. "We'll get through this, Sarah. Just tell the truth. The judge will see it." But would he? The prosecutor, a young, ambitious man, laid out the charges with clinical precision. Mark Thorne claimed Sarah had entered his apartment, their former marital home, using a key she'd illicitly kept, and stolen valuable documents related to his business, along with a significant sum of cash he'd had in a safe. Furthermore, he presented a restraining order, apparently served to a non-existent address for Sarah, claiming she'd come within 100 feet of him, hence the violation. It was a tapestry of lies, so skillfully woven it sounded plausible, damning. Sarah felt sick. He was trying to make her look like a common criminal, a vindictive ex out for revenge and money. The judge, a stern-faced man named Arthur Thompson, listened impassively, his gaze sweeping over Sarah, making her feel small and insignificant. He had a reputation for being tough, but fair. Right now, Sarah only saw the tough Ms. Vance did her best, cross-examining Mark's statement, pointing out inconsistencies, Sarah's lack of prior offenses, her role as primary caregiver to their children. "Your Honor," she argued, "this is a clear case of a bitter ex-husband attempting to manipulate the justice system to gain leverage in an ongoing custody dispute. Ms. Miller is a devoted mother with no criminal record. These charges are baseless." Mr. Peterson, Mark's lawyer, countered smoothly. "Your Honor, my client has provided sworn testimony and evidence of the theft and the restraining order violation. Ms. Miller's emotional state following a difficult divorce is understandable, but it does not excuse her actions. We believe she poses a flight risk and a potential danger, given her blatant disregard for a court order." "Danger!" Sarah wanted to scream. He was the danger. He was the one who had terrorized her. But she remained silent, clenching her trembling, hands in her lap, trying to project an image of composure she was far from feeling. The courtroom felt like it was closing in on her. The thought of her children, confused and scared, waiting for her, was an unbearable weight. If bail was denied, if she was sent to jail pending trial, she couldn't fathom it. Judge Thompson peered down from the bench, his gaze settling on Sarah again. He had a thick file in front of him, presumably her case file, and he flipped through a few pages slowly. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Sarah held her breath. This was it, the moment that would decide her immediate future. "Ms. Miller," the judge began, his voice resonating through the courtroom, "these are serious accusations. Grand larceny carries a significant penalty." He paused, and Sarah's heart sank. This was not sounding good. He continued to look at her, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. It wasn't the stern, impersonal look from before. It was more focused, puzzled almost. Sarah Miller, he said again, slowly, as if tasting the name. He then looked down at his papers. Is your maiden name, by any chance, Hayes? Sarah Elizabeth Hayes? Sarah blinked, caught off guard. Her maiden name. She hadn't used it in nearly a decade. Yes, Your Honor, it is. A ripple of confusion went through her. What did her maiden name have to do with anything? Judge Thompson leaned back in his chair. His eyes, which had seemed so distant and judgmental before, now held a flicker of something else. Recognition? He wasn't looking at Mark or the lawyers. He was looking directly at Sarah, a deep, penetrating gaze that seemed to search for something beyond the orange jumpsuit and the current charges. Sarah Hayes, he mused, almost to himself. Then his eyes sharpened. I remember that name. And I remember you. A collective gasp seemed to hang in the air. Mark shifted uneasily in his seat, his smug expression faltering for the first time. Mr. Peterson looked confused. Miss Vance looked at Sarah with wide, questioning eyes. Sarah herself was utterly bewildered. Where could Judge Thompson possibly know her from? Her life before Mark had been unremarkable, quiet. She'd been a student, then a junior graphic designer. Nothing that would bring her into contact with a judge. Your Honor, Ms. Vance ventured, breaking the tense silence. Judge Thompson held up a hand, still looking at Sarah. It was about 15 years ago, I believe. A case involving a fraudulent investment scheme. A company called Future Bright Investments. You were a key witness for the prosecution, Ms. Hayes. Or rather, Ms. Miller now. Sarah's mind flashed back. Future Bright Investments. Yes. She'd been fresh out of college, working her first job at a small design firm. The firm had been commissioned to do some branding work for them. She'd only been there a few months. When she started noticing irregularities, conversations she'd overheard, documents she'd inadvertently seen, the people running it were slick, persuasive, but something felt off. Young and naive as she was, she'd initially dismissed her own concerns. But then, her own grandmother had mentioned wanting to invest her modest savings with them, and Sarah, armed with a growing unease, had looked closer, piecing together snippets of information. She had, with a courage she didn't know she possessed, anonymously tipped off the authorities. When the investigators came, she'd agreed to testify, despite the subtle threats and the pressure. It had been a terrifying experience. The perpetrators were powerful, well-connected. She'd been a young woman, alone, her testimony crucial. They'd tried to discredit her, paint her as a disgruntled employee, as confused, even complicit. But she'd stood her ground, spoken the truth clearly and calmly. Her testimony had been instrumental in their conviction, in bringing down a scheme that had defrauded dozens of vulnerable people, many of them elderly, out of their life savings. You were remarkably composed and articulate back then, Ms. Hayes, Judge Thompson continued, his voice softer now, almost gentle. You faced considerable pressure, attempts at intimidation, if I recall correctly. Yet you did the right thing, at significant personal risk. Your integrity was notable. He paused, then his gaze hardened as it shifted, slowly, deliberately, towards Mark Thorne. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, his voice now like steel. "Your accusations against Ms. Miller are elaborate. You claim she stole business documents and cash. You claim she violated a restraining order, an order Ms. Miller states she was never properly served with, at an address she does not reside at." Mark, who had gone pale, started to bluster. "Your Honor, she is lying. She is manipulative. Mr. Thorne." Judge Thompson cut him off sharply, his voice echoing with authority. "It is a serious offense to file a false police report. It is an even more serious offense to commit perjury in this courtroom. And it is a despicable act to weaponize the legal system and your own children to harass and intimidate a former spouse." The judge looked back at Sarah, then at the file. "The accusation of grand larceny for business documents. This business, Mr. Thorne, what is its nature?" Mr. Peterson quickly stood up. "Your Honor, my client's business dealings are not on trial here. They may become relevant if it appears these documents were part of an attempt to fabricate evidence, or if Mr. Thorne is attempting to hide assets in a contentious divorce." "Mr. Peterson," the judge retorted. He then addressed one of the court officers. "Bailiff, please retrieve the full file on future Bright investments. I believe there was a list of associates, minor players who were investigated but perhaps not charged. Some names might jog my memory further." A visible wave of panic crossed Mark's face. He started sweating. This is irrelevant, Your Honor. She stole from me. She is a threat." Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed. "The only threat I currently perceive in this courtroom, Mr. Thorne, is the threat your vindictive actions pose to the administration of justice and to the well-being of your children. You bring Ms. Miller here, arrested in front of her children, based on accusations that, in light of my recollection of her character under immense pressure 15 years ago, now seem highly suspect. A woman who stood up to dangerous criminals, to protect others, now accused of petty theft and harassment by her ex-husband, with whom she is in a custody battle." He shook his head. "It strains credulity." He looked at the arresting officer's report again. "The restraining order, served at an address confirmed to be an abandoned building site for the last 3 years, and the alleged theft from a safe, Mr. Thorne, that you had the combination changed on the day after Ms. Miller left the marital home 6 months ago. According to your own locksmith's receipt you proudly attached as proof of your ownership of said safe. How, precisely, did she access it?" Mark stammered. She must have gotten the new combination somehow." "Somehow," the judge repeated, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Ms. Vance, do you have anything to add?" Eleanor Vance, who had been watching this exchange with growing astonishment and dawning hope, stood straighter. "Your Honor, it's clear that Mr. Thorne has concocted these charges. Sarah Miller is a woman of demonstrable integrity, as you yourself have attested. This is a malicious prosecution. We request an immediate dismissal of all charges and that the court consider sanctions against Mr. Thorne for this abuse of process." Judge Thompson looked at Mark, whose face was now a mask of fury and fear. "Mr. Thorne, the dirty past you attempted to paint for Ms. Miller has, ironically, illuminated her strength of character for this court. It seems the only one with something to hide here is you." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The charges against Ms. Sarah Miller, formerly Hayes, are dismissed with prejudice. A gasp, then a sob of pure relief escaped Sarah's lips. Dismissed with prejudice. It was over. The weight that had been crushing her for hours, for months, for years, suddenly lifted. Tears streamed down her face, tears of gratitude, of vindication. Furthermore, Judge Thompson continued, his gaze fixed on Mark. This court will be initiating an investigation into potential perjury and filing a false police report by Mr. Thorne. Officer Miller, please take Mr. Thorne's statement regarding the source of his information about Ms. Miller's alleged actions and the service of this restraining order, and I will be reviewing the terms of their ongoing family court matters in light of this egregious behavior. He banged his gavel. Court adjourned. Ms. Vance was hugging a weeping Sarah. You did it, Sarah. Your past, your integrity, it saved you. He remembered, Sarah whispered, still in disbelief. After all these years, he remembered. It wasn't just that he remembered. It was that he saw her, the real her, not the monster Mark had tried to portray. The process of being released was swift. The orange jumpsuit was exchanged for her own clothes, which felt like a queen's robes. Walking out of the courthouse, a free woman, into the bright afternoon sun, Sarah felt reborn, and waiting for her, by the steps, were Lily and Tom, with a tearful but smiling Carol. "Mommy!" They shrieked in unison, launching themselves into her arms. Sarah sank to her knees, embracing them tightly, burying her face in their hair, inhaling their familiar, comforting scent. "Oh, my babies, my brave, brave babies, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Lily pulled back slightly, her small face serious. "Were those bad men lying, Mommy?" "Yes, sweetie," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion as she looked into her daughter's eyes. They were. But a very kind judge knew Mommy was telling the truth. Looking at her children, their faces alight with relief and love, Sarah knew the fight wasn't entirely over. Mark would still be a factor in their lives. But something fundamental had shifted. He had overplayed his hand, and his cruelty had been exposed. The system, which had seemed so terrifyingly rigged against her, had, through an almost miraculous twist of fate, worked. A judge had remembered a young woman's courage from long ago, and had seen through the lies of the present. As Carol drove them home, Sarah held her children close. The smell of pancakes was long gone, replaced by the scent of freedom and the promise of a new beginning. The emotional scars of the arrest, the humiliation, the fear, those would take time to heal. But beneath the pain, a new strength was blooming. She had faced Mark's worst, stared into the abyss of injustice, and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. She had overcome. And in the eyes of her children, she saw not the reflection of a woman arrested, but of a mother who had faced down, a monster and won, a mother whose past, far from being dirty, was a testament to her enduring spirit. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Sarah Miller, formerly Sarah Hayes, knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she could face anything. She was, after all, a woman of notable integrity. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for your time. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe. It truly helps the channel. Click the video on screen and I'll see you there.